Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mending Families, episode 2. This is going to be a solo episode, and this is going to be the first episode of what I'm going to be calling Mondays with Melissa. Isn't that cute? Okay, so the way this is going to work is every other week, you're going to get just me. And it's just going to be you and me sitting here having a chat, talking about the previous week's episode. So I just know that after I have interviewed someone, I'm going to have my own thoughts that I just can't fit into the time frame of the interview episode. And so I'm going to come back the following week and just share my thoughts and maybe some other resources based on what we talked about. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode 1, I interviewed my husband, John Pemberton. Go back and listen to that because it'll give a little context for what we're going to talk about today. We talked about a lot of things, but what I'm going to focus on today is spanking because that did come up, corporal punishment. And John is passionate about that. He was raised in a home that he was spanked. I also was raised in a home where I was spanked, but it was different. We had different experiences with that. And he just was raised to think that that was the only way. And so when he came into our marriage, I already had a child. And we had to have some hard conversations about that, about why I didn't spank. And ultimately, he was able to get there on his own and did make that decision that spanking was not for him. And he just really is passionate about making sure people understand that there are other ways, that you don't have to spank just because that's all you know. So let's dive in here, shall we? Spanking. Yeah, it can feel like that is a great parenting strategy when you have a kiddo who is super defiant or doing something that feels really unsafe and you just want them to understand the consequences of their actions, right? But let's pull this apart a little bit. Okay, 2 things. 1, your child is a human. Okay. Your child deserves respect, right? Okay. The second thing, we cannot control other people. That's just not how humans are made. Okay. So if we think about our child as a human and it's not our job to control them, then spanking doesn't really fit in. Because if we are actually seeing our child as another human being who deserves respect, we would have no thought in our mind that we would want to hit that person, right? John used this example in the episode last week. I don't get to go to work and hit my coworker if I'm upset with them, if I'm really angry, or I don't get to hit my coworker if they are disrespectful to me or doing something that I think isn't safe. I don't get to hit them. So why would it be different for us to think that it's okay for us to hit our children? One of the things that John and I talked about when we were dating was I shared with him this thought. How does it make sense that if my child hits me or hits another person, that then I get to hit them, but call it discipline? It really doesn't make sense. And what are we teaching our child? That it's okay for me to hit him, but it's not okay for him to hit anyone else. That just doesn't equate. And we're setting our kids up to misunderstand relationship, to misunderstand what it means to be respectful of another human. So we want to be aware of mutual respect. If I want my child to respect me, I need to respect them. If I don't want my child to hit me, I probably shouldn't hit them, right? We also need to look at control. We actually cannot control our kids. They are humans, and we actually can be harming them if we are constantly controlling their every move, their every word, because we're not allowing them the opportunity to explore and to figure out on their own who they are and what they like and what they don't like. It's a really fine line that we have to walk on. Okay. So we can't control our kids. Can we influence our kids? Absolutely. So if we view the way that we parent in the context of I'm influencing how they are in relationship and the choices they make and how they think about what they're doing each day, as opposed to I'm going to control everything they do so that they're safe. That also takes away the opportunity to spank, because if we're influencing their behavior, spanking them is going to influence them to hit other people. Okay. And then the last thing is we really need to think about when we're thinking about using spanking as discipline is that it's fear-based, that we are instilling fear into our child. They are afraid that we're going to hit them if they make a bad choice. And so they might make good choices out of fear that we're going to hit them, not because they actually have learned right from wrong, not because they actually understand that what they did was not safe, and not because we have given them an alternative. We don't want our kids to be in relationships where they are making choices out of fear. Then we have kids who grow up to be in adult relationships that are afraid to speak their mind, that are afraid to be their true, authentic self. Because what if I hurt my spouse and they lash out? What if I say the wrong thing to my boss and he fires me? Okay. Mutual respect. If we have that, we don't need to be afraid of what other people in relationship are going to do or say or how they're going to respond. Okay, let's move on to some alternatives to spanking, shall we? I gave you some good things to think about why spanking may not be great. And now here's some ideas for alternatives to spanking. So let's focus on the needs behind the behavior. Kids don't typically, and honestly, adults don't typically behave with big behaviors just because. There's usually a need behind that behavior. And could the need be as simple as the child is hungry? They haven't eaten for 4 hours and they might need a snack. Okay. When our brains and bodies are starting to feel low blood sugar, it affects how we behave. It affects the choices that we make. It makes our brains work slightly different. So let's be aware of what the need is behind the behavior. Hungry, tired, thirsty, cold, too hot. Maybe a sensory need. Maybe if your kiddo has some sensory needs, they need to go move their bodies. They need a bear hug. They need something that is going to allow them to get that sensory input that they are seeking. Or maybe the need could be connection. We oftentimes will catch ourselves saying, and I'm sure you will, I'm sure that you will recognize this when I say it. It's just an attention seeking behavior. Well, if we think about that from the perspective of maybe a connection seeking behavior, maybe our kiddo is just trying to connect with us. And these big behaviors are their way of saying, see me, hear me, value me. So if we slow down, get on their level, get eye contact with them and really say, whew, you're having some big feelings right now. What do you need from me? Let's see those needs behind the behavior, okay? Another thing is we need to be a detective. So as we are looking for the needs behind the behavior, we have to be a detective in the sense of paying attention to patterns. Does this big behavior happen every Tuesday after school? Maybe there's something happening at school on Tuesdays. Does this big behavior happen when it's bedtime every single night? Maybe there's something about bedtime that we need to be paying attention to. Does this behavior happen every day when we get home from school? Let's pay attention to that. Are they hungry? Has it been a while since they've eaten? Right? So we need to be a detective. And sometimes that means getting out pen and paper and tracking for 2 weeks. This behavior that I am seeing that is really hard and maybe triggers me a little bit. What is the time frame? What is happening? When's the last time they ate? When's the last time they drank? When's the last time that they took a nap? Or is it 6:00 at night and they are just done for the day? They're tired, right? Pen and paper, write it down, be a detective, look for patterns. Okay. All right. And then the last thing that I want to just point out is instead of spanking, let's think about how our child's brain works. If there is something big happening in their brain, in their body, whether it's hungry, tired, thirsty, sensory need, or whether it is something bigger than that. They have a memory that was triggered by the color of the wall or a smell or a time of day or an anniversary. This time of the year is maybe when something really big and traumatic happened for them. So if their brain and their body is responding from a big feeling, we have to help them regulate first. Is spanking regulating? No, it's doing the opposite. It's continuing to add to the fear that their body feels, the way that their body is responding to whatever the big feeling is. Okay, so let's regulate with them first. That might look like holding your nine-year-old in your lap and rocking her. That might look like offering a sucker to your child because we know that sucking can help regulate. That might look like sitting next to your child and just holding them, putting your arm around them, patting their knee, rubbing their hand. So you know your child best. And if you're not sure how to regulate your child, go back to that detective diary, write down the things that you notice that help your child calm down and start to use those as your go-to. Okay, we regulate, then we're going to connect. So once we have the child in the part of their brain where they are calm and their heart rate is no longer increased, their eyes are no longer huge, their breathing has slowed, and you can just sense that their body is a little bit more relaxed, let's connect with them. Let's talk to them. Again, maybe just sitting there still helping them regulate can be the connection, the still holding and rocking, the rubbing their hand, offering a back massage. Can I rub your back for you? Can I rub your feet for you? Do you want to play a game? Do you want to read a book? These are all opportunities that can continue to help our child regulate while connecting. Once we have regulated and connected, that's when we can correct. That's when we go to the place of, let's talk about what just happened. You had a big feeling and you hit mom or whatever. That's an example, right? You had a big feeling and you hit mom. Let's talk about that. What was going on for you, buddy? And once they're regulated and connected with you, they feel safe enough to say, I didn't like how you were looking at me. It scared me. Or you told me that it was time to go to school and I don't want to go to school. It opens the door for them to be honest about where that behavior came from, what the need was behind that behavior, right? So we need to regulate, connect, and then we can correct. Correcting can be as simple as having a conversation about what happened, and then let's do a redo. Okay, I know that maybe made you feel a little bit scared when I looked at you that way. So can I have a redo? Yes, you heard me right. I asked for the redo. I did not tell him to do a redo. Okay, can I have a redo? And then I'm going to say the same thing that I said, but this time I'm going to be more aware of what my face looks like. And guess what? He's probably going to respond differently. So then I get to praise him for his redo. He may not even be aware that that's what we're doing right now. But then he responds with, okay, mom, or whatever it is that I asked him. And then I say, that was a really good redo. I appreciate that you didn't hit me because that was a hurt. You see how simple that was? And then we move on. Okay. So let's focus on that instead of going directly to the controlling discipline, instead of the fear-based timeout, spanking, grounding, taking items away, things that we do to try and control our kids. Let's slow down and try and get on their level, meet them where they're at. All right. So regulate, connect, and then correct. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about, this is going to be really brief and short because frankly, we just don't have a lot of time and it just is a bigger topic, but I did want to address it because John and I both talked about in the last episode about how we were raised in the church. We were both raised as that spanking was what the church said was best, okay? That is what God said was best. That's how we were raised. And we have very different experiences, so I'm just going to talk from my experience in the sense that I was always told that And let me be clear too, that I was spanked as a child, but I didn't make the connection that that's because that's what God said or what the Bible said. It was a very different situation for me. So what I'm talking about is when I was a young mom. I had my daughter when I was a teenager and started going back to church when she was 2. And when I started going back to church with a child, that is when I started to hear spanking is the right thing to do because that's what God would say. That's what the Bible says. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So I did. I spanked when Haley was very little, and I regret it, and I have apologized to her. I know her body remembers it, even though she doesn't. And I'm so thankful that 2 things happened for me. One, I started to do my own research on what that actually meant. And 2, I started to go to school for child development where I learned the very opposite, that spanking is actually more harmful than good. And so I can remember coming to a parenting class at the church I was attending and having them talk about the importance of spanking and me asking, can we talk about that? Why do you think spanking is okay? What about the research that says it's not okay? And I'm so thankful that the pastor at the church that I was taking that class at, um, he had the ability to just say, yeah, tell me more about that. Let's have a conversation. But I can tell you there's a lot of pastors and a lot of churches that don't do that, that just say, the Bible is very clear that God says we have to spank our children. And they're not willing to have conversation. They're not willing to consider that there might be another way. So let me tell you my thoughts on what I learned when I actually looked into that verse, spare the rod, spoil the child. This was in reference to how shepherds treat sheep. And the idea is if the shepherd is not leading the sheep with the rod, then the sheep are going to stray. The shepherd does not hit the sheep with the rod. The shepherd guides the sheep with the rod. So the rod was not a literal hit your child with a rod. This was an example that was given to show how, if we as parents are leading our children, we should be guiding them. We should be teaching them like a disciple, right? That's where the word discipline comes from, or discipline and disciple come from the same word. I apologize. And that is to guide, to teach, to model. Okay, so that verse is not hit your child with a rod so that they're not spoiled. That's not what it means. It's about guiding and leading your child. Okay, I'm not going to go into a lot more on that. I just wanted to share my thoughts and what I learned as a young mom who was told by the church to spank my child. And honestly, when I did, it didn't help. It made her worse. When I started learning new ways to parent and to view parenting as mutual respect, guiding, teaching, directing my child, things went a lot better. It was still a long road and we were still learning. So it wasn't like an overnight change, but I just wanted to share that's my experience. So if you have any more questions about any of that, please feel free to hop into my DMs on Instagram or even shoot me an email. I'm so easy to find. Mending Families WA is my handle on all the different places. And so you can definitely, I would love to have more conversation with you if you would like to do that. Okay, I'm going to close out today with a couple of resources. The first one is one of my most favorite Instagram influencers that I follow is Mr. Chaz. So it's MRCHAZZ. And I will link his Instagram in the show notes so that you can find him easily. But he is amazing. He is so funny, so entertaining, but has a lot of good things to say about corporal punishment and how we should be viewing parenting in a different way. And then 2 books that I love that I wanted to recommend to you. And again, I will link them in the show notes so you can find them on Amazon. But honestly, I saw one of these books at a local thrift store this week. And so maybe check there first because it was like $2. The first one is A Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel. Super great book that really helps you better understand the brain development, and how we as parents can help our kids influence their behavior, right? That we don't have to control them, that we can see them as a whole child, that it's not just the behavior. It's not just how their body is or how their brain works. It's all of it. So Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel, and then The Connected Child by Dr. Karen Purvis. And she is the founder of Trust-Based Relational Interventions, which I love, and John and I both referenced in our last episode. And so that would be a good starting point for you too. And she does address spanking in that book as well. So if you want to have just a jumping off point, I would recommend those two books, or even Mr. Chaz on Instagram. All right, you guys, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here with me to have this conversation. That is not an easy conversation to have, but I appreciate you listening and joining in. Really quick, I just want to ask you to please consider subscribing to my podcast I'm on all the platforms. I don't even know a platform that I'm not on. So if I'm not on a platform, please tell me, because I want to be there. I am going to be on YouTube very soon, so you can also find me on YouTube. Again, it's Mending Families WA on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, but then on the podcast, it's just Mending Families. So please subscribe where you listen, share with a friend. That is my heart, is to get this information out to as many people as possible. And then give me a review. Reviews are so important. That's what I'm told, that if I have good reviews, or even reviews at all, that Apple Podcasts in particular will bump me up. So let's do that, shall we? Okay, you guys, I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to next week, where I will be interviewing one of my friends, Cassie Day. Have a good day.